And as a part of that, we have some of our rankers that are coming onto the show today. And we're going to highlight our rankings for quarterbacks and tight ends today. Myself, Joshua Hudson, my co-host, Ryan Weisse, and three of our rankers, Austin Amandolia, Steve Lawson, and Joel Wirth. So stay tuned.
What's going on? I'm Austin Amandolia. I am your host tonight for this special episode of No Punt Intended. We're talking quarterback and tight end rankings tonight. Before we introduce the show, I want to do a quick round robin just to introduce everyone and make sure everybody's Twitter handles get out there. Our consistent rankers this year are myself at Austin_FFL. Joshua Hudson, the founder of Club Fantasy at The One Hudsonian. Ryan Weisse, my co-host for our Mock It Like It's Hot podcast and the co-host of this podcast at The Fantasy 5. Joel Wirth at The Joel Wirth, and Steve Lawson at FF by Committee. Guys, how's it going?
It's going great.
I'm very excited for this. As soon as the rankings went up, I started looking at them and getting very angry at some people and very excited by other people and very happy to organize this ranking show. So we're going to get into it. But first, I want to talk about our rankings process just a little bit. So our consensus rankings, first off, can be found on our website, clubfantasyffl.com. There are 6 of us in our consensus rankings. Chris Molina is also one of our rankers and could not join us tonight. We will be updating our rankings every Friday until the season starts. So that'll be the time to tune in to see how things shake up from week to week. And for the next 3 weeks, we're going to be going live on Thursdays at 7 p.m. Eastern time to discuss our rankings. Tonight, we're doing quarterbacks and tight ends, partially because the tight end position is my least favorite position, and also because you really don't need to get outside of the top 12 for both of those positions unless you're in a super flex league. This is going to be geared more to kind of traditional redraft leagues. Next week, we're going to talk running backs and try and hit that as early as possible because that's one of the tougher positions. And then we're saving wide receivers for last because there's a lot of receivers to love. I have receivers ranked in the 30s and 40s that I'm not mad if they're on my lineup. That's a different situation for running backs.
Yeah. Before we dive in, I want to give a quick shout out to actually you guys. When Josh invited me to be a part of Club Fantasy 2.5 years ago, I floated the idea of us doing rankings, and we did just, me, Josh, and Chris. And then last year, things got a little bit harder, and I ended up creating a background system where we could do a conglomerate of our rankings, but we just had one set of rankings that was the consensus. But this year, to have all of you guys on and we all have our own individual rankings, it's been really cool just to see the differences and fight about the differences in the group chat. So, Austin, I thought this was a wonderful show idea, and I'm having fun with it. So
awesome. That's great. And we got some great listeners already. First off, Faith, always here to give Josh hell, and I love it. And also, we have a guest just playing to the host. Tight end is the most important position along with kicker, not a biased Falcons fan. I mean, hey, I'm here for it.
That's also a Falcons fan.
This is also a biased
Falcons
fan.
That's Josh, the Smoke Show host, in disguise there.
I just love that Elixirs has already wants to get young Waku involved in the show, and we don't even have plans for a kicker ranking show at this point.
Not even 5 minutes in, and we're talking kickers. What is this nonsense?
I'm just happy to see Faith tuned in, who Faith in a group chat earlier today with me and Josh made it very clear that she hasn't tuned into the mock draft show in at least a month. We won't talk much about that, but hey, Faith, thanks for joining the show tonight, babe.
It's a busy time of year.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad to be here with you for before we get into our consensus quarterback rankings. I did want to touch on 2 pieces of news that have been floating around One Piece for a really long time, and One Piece has kind of been more recent, related to the quarterback position. First, I wanted to briefly touch on Tom Brady. And the reason I wanted to bring him up is he's been MIA at camp, essentially. About, I think it was a few days or a week ago, he was reported that he had left camp so that he could attend to some personal issues. There hasn't been much more come out about what he is dealing with or attending to right now, but he's continued to not be at camp. And today I started seeing some apprehension about this spiraling around the Twitterverse. And so I just wanted to ask our rankers, are we worried about this?
Yes.
Go ahead, Joel.
Okay, go, Joel. Joel thinks we should be worried about this.
I tweeted today, I think this is a shadow suspension for the Miami tampering, just like Michael Jordan back in the 90s with the gambling. I mean, hopefully, obviously his mom has cancer and stuff, and that hopefully it's not something serious. They said it was something pre-planned. So, if they're being up and up, then that would kind of rule that out. So obviously we hope it's not a personal issue, but this is unusual. At best. I mean, how many times does the star quarterback just go off on his own for a week and a half? It just doesn't happen. So,
Yep. Well,
I think you got to be nervous about it at least.
What I found even more interesting is you said a week and a half, but then didn't the news drop today that they have no timetable for his return? Like that's
no like definite return date.
Yeah.
Like it's not like this feels like a deal he struck where they were like, come back one more time. And he's like, listen, I'm not going through this entire offseason crap. All right. Like, I'm 45 years old. Like, I'm not doing this anymore. I've run enough offenses. I've played longer than most of these guys have been alive. So I will come and go as I please. I'm taking 3 weeks off in the summer to go on vacation with my wife and kids because I'm sure Giselle was not thrilled that he unretired after 2 months. The man gets home and is like, yeah, this isn't for me. Like, I just can't be this guy.
You're made of money. You could take a vacation where the weather's warm at any time and you do it in the middle of training camp. That's the part that bothers me. And the great Joe Bryant, who I'm definitely not like hyping up because he's my boss at another website, kind of brought up with something like, if this is the kind of like laissez-faire attitude that Tom Brady's going to have this season, is there a chance he decides to not travel with the team to their like Germany game? And now we're talking about Tom Brady missing games in the middle of the season because he wants to be healthier. And
I don't know. I don't think Tom Brady's going to miss games. I think like laissez-faire and Tom Brady is not exactly a.
He's doing it right now.
But we don't know, right?
We're talking, okay. In the great words of Allen Iverson, we're talking about practice here. Like, come on.
I have no comeback to that.
Preseason.
It's the
How
most
many
perfect
out routes does
ever.
Tom Brady have to throw? He's thrown 15,000 of them, like in actual game situations. You're not going to show him anything in practice he doesn't know. And again, it's all speculation, right? We're all thinking maybe he's on vacation, maybe he's not. Maybe someone that's the thing is like we don't know if someone did get sick or if something's going on, right? So we don't want to speculate too much and be like he doesn't care about the game just yet because that's not Tom Brady's MO. But I think it's more concerning for guys not named Mike Evans and Chris Godwin that Tom Brady isn't there.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think
all
that's
getting hurt anyway. Didn't Tyler Johnson end up leaving practice today with a hurt leg or something?
Oh no, what will they ever do without Tyler Johnson?
I'm just saying, they're dropping like flies. Honestly, to me, the only person this truly hurts is Julio Jones. Because he's the one that actually needs to build the rapport.
Julio Jones is in a whole different trouble. Did you see that video of him at camp? Like, that man looks like he's running through mud. Like, that is not good. Like, he looks slow.
Okay, so this is going to be a great topic for our week 3 show when we talk wide receivers. But with that, we're going to pivot to the second piece of news. And frankly, I don't want to talk about the fantasy side of this. I just want to talk about the headline because folks who are coming here for advice should just need to know the latest update. But the Deshaun Watson suspension got extended today. It is now an 11-game suspension, and he was also fined $5 million of his, $45 million that he is going to make this season. I've talked about this before.
No, remember, they're only going to pay him one.
Yeah, that's
right. Like they're only going to pay him $1 million this year.
Well, let's not forget he made
So-
20 to do nothing last year. So.
Right. Well, and so see, you just sucked me in, and now I have to talk about more about it. The interesting thing about it is the 11-game suspension is very aptly set because there is a certain number of games that Watson needs to be active for in order to receive his salary for the season. If the suspension had been longer, then it would have been so that Cleveland Browns could have only paid him $1 million, but because of the length, he actually should get his full contract for the season.
Interesting.
So I've said this before. This whole situation has been very heartbreaking and frustrating from just a societal perspective. And we're in the middle of our Women of Fantasy Football series, and for me, like the impact that Deshaun Watson's actions have had on women, both the women he directly impacted and those who are fans of the NFL that have been indirectly impacted, is more important than any fantasy football aspect to me. I have not been ranking Watson as it is, and I will continue to not rank him. The only thing I would say is for those who have been ranking him, he's clearly going to take a hit after this. And that's all I want to say on his fantasy value. With that, I'm going to pivot to a way more fun topic, which is going to be our consensus quarterback rankings. So the way these shows are going to be organized is we're going to start with our consensus rankings, and I'm just going to go through them. And then from there, I have a set of questions that I have set up in advance that our guests are aware of. For the most part, there's some stuff that I've tried to keep secret, but it's really hard when you want your guests to be prepared. But here we are. We're going to start with quarterbacks. So our consensus quarterbacks for QB1 through QB12. So these are going to be your starting quarterbacks in a 12-team league. Number 1, Josh Allen, followed by Justin Herbert, Patrick Mahomes, Kyler Murray, Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts, Joe Burrow, Russell Wilson, Tom Brady at the 9th spot, Dak Prescott, Trey Lance, and at number 11, and then Derek Carr rounding out the top 12 quarterbacks by our consensus rankings. And I've been waiting to start this show so that I could ask this first question because we have got to talk about someone who did not make our top 12 rankings. And I'm like really annoyed about this too, because I don't really love the guy. I don't want to be here defending him, but
Nobody
here I
does.
am having to be the voice of reason because Aaron Rodgers landed as the quarterback 15 in our consensus rankings. QB 15. So here's how we're going to do this. I'm going to go through everyone on this screen and go from the people who ranked him the highest to the lowest and give them a chance to talk about Aaron Rodgers before I wrap up and I make everybody realize why they're wrong. And we're going to start with Joel, who has Aaron Rodgers ranked at quarterback 10.
Am I the highest?
You are the highest. Well, maybe apart from me, but you are the highest of this group. So
Okay, well, no
be the
Packer
voice of
fan
reason
bias
for us.
there, but yeah, I think he's going to do what he does, right? He's going to go throw 30 to 35 touchdown passes. He's not going to run at all. He hasn't hit 200 yards rushing in 3 years at least now. So he doesn't give you that rushing aspect that that some of the guys at the top do, but he's going to throw 30 to 35 touchdown passes. He's going to throw touchdowns at the goal line inside the 5. That's what he does. He's going to keep doing it. The skills haven't diminished. He's the same guy. He'll make those wide receivers work. He'll be fine.
I love it. So next on our list would be Chris, who has Aaron Rodgers at QB 11. He's not here with us tonight. So now we go to Ryan, who is a little bit lower on Aaron Rodgers at QB 14. Why is Aaron Rodgers not a QB 1 in your mind?
It's a question of the weapons at this point. And I understand that, for years we've said Aaron Rodgers has created his weapons, and you even have like Greg Jennings in the notes, but I think Greg Jennings is still better than what he had at this point. And now we're talking about a 38-year-old dude in an offense that he's been able to shape and mold and work with Devontae Adams, but like the cupboard is bare outside of Aaron Jones at this point. I'm not a Lazard guy. I think he's going to do well for fantasy purposes just based on his draft value, but that's for another show. I don't know that there's anyone there for Aaron Rodgers to lean into. And I agree exactly with what Joel said is he is likely a 30 to 35 touchdown guy, but he's not going to run much. He will get you some rushing touchdowns, but 30 to 35 touchdowns. And then I think we're looking more at the 2020 passing volume versus the 2021. I don't know that they're going to be out there slinging it 590 times. If it falls down into 530, 540, if you take 100 points away from Aaron Rodgers in his 2020 fantasy scoring, it knocks him all the way down to QB 11. And now you're taking away Devontae Adams on top of that. So for me, he's not one of the top 12 quarterbacks off the board for me. It's pretty easily for me. I do my rankings completely based on my projections. It is where I have the Green Bay offense, but sometimes you'll play around with your projections and you'll say, I would still take Aaron Rodgers in the top 12. I look at the top 12 and I would easily take any of those guys over Rodgers.
Okay, so we're going to go to Josh next, who is in a similar category as Ryan. Josh, you have much to add. You have Aaron Rodgers at QB 15.
Yeah, so here's kind of my simple analysis that I'm just going to kind of piggyback on Ryan a little bit. He mentioned the lack of the weapons, the lower number of passing attempts. That's kind of where I'm at with Rodgers. I'll hit on a point that Joel hit on. Rodgers hasn't rushed for over 200 yards in God knows how long. I currently have 5 quarterbacks ranked ahead of Aaron Rodgers that all have more than 500 yards rushing. That is what elevates quarterbacks in fantasy football. But to that point, do I think that Rodgers is going to finish as the QB 15? Probably not, because we see it every year. Somebody gets hurt. Running quarterbacks, as valuable as they are, they don't tend to play all 16, 17 games in a season. So you're going to see, his points per game might be, QB 15, but he might still end up finishing as a QB 10 or QB 11, just because some of these guys like, maybe Jalen Hurts misses a game. Maybe Trey Lance misses 2 or 3 games. Maybe Justin Fields misses games. Maybe Josh Allen misses a game. Some of these guys Lamar Jackson might miss a couple games. He missed like 4 or 5 last year. So there's plenty of guys that are ahead of him that still are going to provide so much more value with their legs. But because of the lack of weapons, I don't see a scenario where Aaron Rodgers is going to throw for 4,800 plus yards to make up that difference in the rushing volume.
It's a fair point. I think you're wrong, but it's fair.
It's fair. That's why we do these shows.
Okay, before we come to my turn, we're going to go to Steve, who it's blasphemous. He has Aaron Rodgers at quarterback 21, like barely a QB2 at this rate. So, Steve, why do you hate Aaron Rodgers?
Yeah.
So I hate Aaron Rodgers, the person, because of the way he is. But I don't like Aaron Rodgers, the player this year, because I think the writing's been on the wall for a few years now that this offense is going to trend toward the run game. When they really needed a wide receiver to complement Devontae Adams, they went and drafted A.J. Dillon instead.
Yeah.
When Devontae Adams' contract came up and it was time to extend arguably the best wide receiver in the NFL, they didn't. And they replaced him with week 1 hero, Sammy Watkins. What makes anybody think Aaron Rodgers is going to be running that show the same way he has? It's a run-first offense. It's a dump-off offense. Now, Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon, great fantasy assets. Aaron Rodgers, not a great fantasy asset, because who is he throwing to? I like Allen Lazard. I would draft Allen Lazard. But Allen Lazard is not a wide receiver 1 in the NFL. This is what the Packers offense wants to do. They want to be defensive-minded. They want to run the ball, and they want to be solid, right? Aaron Rodgers is going to trend in his older age toward being a game manager, which is what he should be at this point in his career.
Okay, so you're all wrong. because this is Aaron
just
Rodgers
a
we're talking
blanket.
about.
Just a blanket.
Just a blanket. Okay, here's my thing about Aaron Rodgers. Since he entered the league in 2008, here are his fantasy football finishes: QB2, QB1, QB2, QB1, QB3. He was injured 2013, so we threw that one out. Next, we have QB1, QB7, QB1, injured in 2017. Then since then, he's been QB6, QB9, QB2, and QB5. Last year, he was QB5. He missed 2 games last year, and he had the worst game of his career in week 1, where the Saints just completely shut out the Green Bay Packers, and he threw 2 interceptions. He basically was a top 5 quarterback last year in 14 games. If he had kept that pace up, he would have been in line with Tom Brady last year. And it's Aaron Rodgers. And we're talking like Alan Lazard is not a threat. He's not a number 1. Fun fact about Alan Lazard that I was going to say for our receiver show, but it feels important now.
So we got you so frustrated now.
Remember last year when Aaron Rodgers got in trouble for violating the NFL COVID protocols?
Vaguely.
Do you remember what event he went to? It was the Halloween party. Do you know who else violated the NFL protocols with him at that Halloween party? Alan Lazard. So I'm buying into the narrative. Those two have a relationship. We do it all the time. We talk about quarterbacks and the relationships with
I don't
receivers.
care unless they're having breakfast together.
It's true.
So just that little nugget about Alan Lazard. But here's also my problem. We have him ranked behind.
Hold on. I have a fun fact for Alan Lazard as well.
Oh, great.
If you took his entire 4-year career and added it together, he was the wide receiver 3 last year.
Don't do this to me. He was behind. He was behind Davante Adams.
Right, but he couldn't even make a name for himself when there was no one else to beat.
Nobody could.
It was just Davante Adams. And Aaron Rodgers literally said to the entire world, I would rather throw to nobody than anyone other than Davante Adams. No one else will catch this ball.
What's funny is I don't want to turn this into an Alan Lazard hate show where he's currently being drafted. I love Alan Lazard.
I have Alan Lazard ranked decently, not great, but like it's fine. That's not great.
Here's my thing.
I'm just going to throw this one point because I feel like we've talked way too long on Aaron Rodgers. But Austin, you bring up a lot of his early career finishes like QB2, QB1, QB2, 1, 3, etc. How many running quarterbacks did they have back then?
Michael Vick?
No.
He was in jail, actually. But
yeah, he was.
So,
yeah,
and this is the point. We are in a completely new era of quarterbacks. Now, I understand he's been doing it recently, but he had arguably the best wide receiver in the league. You look at the wide receiver core that he had before: Jennings, Jordy Nelson, early years Randall Cobb. Like, these are much better quality weapons than he currently has sitting with him right now. And he doesn't offer that rushing upside. We are in an era where running quarterbacks dominate in fantasy. When you don't have that, you have to throw for 46, 47, 4,800 yards and 35 plus touchdowns. When you have a bucket of scrubs catching passes from you, you're not going to throw 40 touchdowns. It's just not going to happen.
I agree. Aaron Rodgers is trash.
Scrubs rhymes with Dubs, future rookie of the year. Let's keep that in mind.
Yeah.
Also, you missed the clip where he was doing his best MVS impersonation, dropping a deep ball towards the end zone. Come on.
Okay, so Josh actually gave me a great pivot opportunity to the next topic. One last nugget on Aaron Rodgers, though. First, if you do play in a league that penalizes interceptions more, like say you have a negative 4-point interception league, Aaron Rodgers threw 4 interceptions last year, and 2 of them were in week 1.
The efficiency from Rodgers, absolutely.
Yeah, it's not an efficiency issue.
It's just an added nugget of like if you have some special scoring, Aaron Rodgers can be relevant.
What psychopath would make a league with -4 for an interception?
I mean, Scott Fish did. Let's be real here.
Moving on.
I mean, he's gold in Scott Fish. He's probably the QB1 in Scott Fish.
I'm actually going to look where he projected in my Scott Fish rankings. Give me 1 second.
Okay.
Awesome. Where are we going?
Now we're going next. We're going to do a blind resume, and this is actually related to the last point that Josh made about rushing quarterbacks. So Steve and Joel are not allowed to answer this question, and Ryan already knows the answer because he figured it out himself before the show. So Josh, you get to answer this question. and get to guess which quarterback is which. So blind resumes, QB-A had 118 rushing yards and 2 rush touchdowns last season. QB-B had 81 rushing yards and also 2 rushing touchdowns last year. Joshua, can you name those quarterbacks? Or have a guess?
B, I believe, is Tom Brady. He never rushes. Actually, I think 81 is probably even high for him.
Very good. Quarterback B is Tom Brady.
And Joe Burrow, I believe.
Very nice. Joe Burrow is quarterback A. So
it also helps that you put our consensus rankings on the sheet. So
I did, but really I didn't think I told you not to look at the consensus rankings.
Well, yeah, but that's why I sold it well.
I'll see. I actually guessed it. I looked at it and then I was like, I have to know if I'm right, and I can't wait a half an hour, so I'm going to go figure it out.
But I'll go back to my point. Those guys threw for 4,500, 4,600 plus yards.
Oh my God, this isn't about Rodgers anymore. Let him host.
Just saying.
Okay, so I want to make this about Tom Brady and Joe Burrow and where they're ranked, because it's interesting. Tom Brady was the number 3 quarterback in fantasy last year, in part because he threw for 5,300 yards, but that offense hasn't really changed that much, although they're starting to struggle on offensive line. And we should just put a pin in the fact that they now have 2 offensive linemen that have gotten injured during preseason training so far, and they are having some injuries at receivers. But these are 2 quarterbacks that are very similar in style. And so first I want to go to Steve, because Steve is the highest on Joe Burrow, has him ranked 6th overall. And so, Steve, you have him ranked ahead of some quarterbacks who have the rushing ability. Why are you so high on Joe Burrow this year?
Easy answer is weapons. Weapons, right? So everywhere you look, Joe Burrow is just surrounded by good players. They've improved that offensive line, which thank God, because we got to keep Joe Burrow off his back. And then you add Jamar Chase, T. Higgins. Their wide receiver 3 is Tyler Boyd. Like, Tyler Boyd is an easy second best wide receiver on most of the teams in the NFL, and he's their 3rd option. Joe Mixon. Hayden Hurst is no scrub either. Like, that's a pretty vertical threat at tight end. This year, I have Joe Burrow projected to throw over 5,000 yards and 36 touchdowns. Like, it is a monster year. He actually comes in 2nd in my projections in passing yards this year. So I think this offense is going to be an air raid, bomb it out kind of offense. Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, both fantasy relevant guys. Jamar Chase even profiles as my wide receiver 4 this year. Like, it's going to be explosive in Cincinnati.
How many touchdowns did you say?
For Joe Burrow?
Yeah.
I have him at 36.
Okay. That's about what I have him as well.
So Joel is the lowest of our rankers on Tom Brady. And again, very similar style of play, yet Joel has Tom Brady ranked at 17th this year. So Joel, you seem to be expressing some concern about Tom Brady going into his year 45 as a starting quarterback in the NFL. Joel, why are you so low on Tom Brady?
Well, I mean, this is before the hiatus took place. So, yeah. I mean, for years, we've said the way you get to Tom Brady is with middle pressure. And if you look at what's happened to you alluded to it, Austin. If you look at what's happened to their line since last year, Ali Marpet retired, Alex Cab is in Cincinnati, buffering Joe Burrow's line. Ryan Jensen tore his ACL, so now he's out for the year. I mean, they brought in Shaq Mason, but how many times has a guy Bill Belichick traded ever turn out to be better than he was in New England? That doesn't happen a lot. Plus, you've got no cohesion, no time with the other guys in the lines. The middle of that line's a problem. And that's, if Tom Brady has an Achilles heel, that's it. If you don't let him step up into the pocket, he's going to have trouble. If that takes away from Leonard Fournette in the running game, then that becomes, then they become one-dimensional. That's even more of an issue. So it's all about their offensive line. It feels like a problem right now.
Do we think Fournette was bulking up to help anchor the offensive line.
Yeah, he was prepping to play right
He's
guard.
auditioning to play Mike Allstott. Let's be honest here. He's going to stuff that line and protect Brady. So,
Are you auditioning to be his agent?
I mean,
Can I just say this about Tom Brady real
the
quick? with
glasses
the
give me a more
offensive line?
sophisticated look that I could pull that off. Is that it?
I just want the 5%.
So here's the thing about Tom Brady, I think, is that he's never had good offensive linemen in his career. Like, realistically, like, he's had one, maybe two, but Tom Brady always makes it work. Tom Brady's a master of shifting the line. If you know where a guy's going to go and you're an NFL caliber talent, you can block. Like, that's the difference of Tom Brady behind center and a lot of other quarterbacks. If you told someone they're going to rush you off your left side, block that way, any of these linemen can do that, and that's what Tom Brady does so well. Tom Brady doesn't really rely on talent in front of him so much as communication and understanding of a system. He'll develop his own pocket. I'm not worried at all about Tom Brady being able to stand in the pocket and throw. So I don't totally agree with Tom Brady being QB 17. Like, this is the GOAT we're talking about.
How's
here.
he going to develop time with those guys if he's on hiatus?
It doesn't
How does that
matter.
happen?
It doesn't matter. He's got Godwin. He's got Evans. Like, who's he trying to develop time with?
You just said he has
The
to develop
offensive
the offensive line.
The
You
offensive
said
line.
it. and they're
Well, the
all
offensive
new.
line has to develop. He doesn't. I mean, realistically, they'll know the calls, right? Tom Brady has the call sheet. Like, Todd Bowles has the call sheet. Byron Leftwich has the call sheet. They'll be like, this means go left. And Tom Brady will shift them left. I mean, if he can go up to someone and be like, they're coming to your left. I mean, I don't know how much communicating that takes other than knowing your right from your left, do this and be like, oh, that way. like it's.
Oh, I want to see an offensive lineman do that in the middle of the play.
I'd say, so
Shit, which
just-
way is it?
So just to be clear, he's going to, in 40 seconds, 25 seconds, call the play and go to each of the 5 offensive linemen and tell them what they need to do on that play because he's putting a lot of
Have
faith.
you watched Tom Brady play? I mean, he's done it, right? He or he goes to the center. Hey, bang, they're doing this, and then they just
I
call
mean,
it out.
all right. I will say, to Steve's point, I can definitely see like the first couple of games being insanely rocky for Brady. Like, you know, I don't know how long this hiatus is going to last, but just coming back and, you know, try to get back into the swing of things. Maybe it's only a half, maybe it's not. But again, you're talking about like a piece together offensive line. Like Tristan Wirfs is really like the lone mainstay on this line right now. So as long as Tom Brady's, what's up?
I was going to say, who also reportedly got banged up in camp today. Haven't heard back on the
everybody gets banged up.
I mean, yeah. So we haven't heard the full injury report yet,
Yeah.
but
I mean, like this is everybody here is making decent points about Brady. For me, the only way that Brady falls outside of the top 10, I would say, is if Father Time finally says, "Yeah, done." Like that's it. Like that's really the only way it's going to happen, in my opinion.
I was going to say, it may not take Father Time. It may take a defensive tackle unblocked who says, yeah.
But you know what? Maybe that's Father Time in disguise. I don't know.
Yeah. The good news is he plays in a division with absolutely no pass rush.
That is
Ryan Burns in Carolina is a good pass rusher.
Derek Brown. Breakout
Derek
year.
Brown, I think, just didn't. Oh, yeah. I guess he could go back, right? Oh, no, that's Malcolm Brown. I'm sorry. I was like, didn't he just get cut? Malcolm Brown got cut.
yes, Ron Brown. So the last thing I want to say on Tom Brady is just, again, highlighting that last season, he was the third best quarterback in fantasy, had over 700 pass attempts and led the league in pass yards and touchdowns. And I think the lesson here in our discussions around Tom Brady and Aaron Rodgers is, to me, they're huge, huge value plays because fantasy experts like us and people who listen to a lot of fantasy football content and pay close attention, they're going to want those rushing quarterbacks and they're going to want to take them very early. And we talk all the time when we mock draft, don't draft a quarterback early. You can wait until there are 10 quarterbacks off the board and probably land a Tom Brady or an Aaron Rodgers who have a safe floor because they'll definitely be I think they'll definitely be at least a quarterback one. We can debate whether or not they'll end up in the top 5, but that was the point of talking about these two quarterbacks in particular, is they have a safe floor and they have a high ceiling, and they are so valuable in drafts right now because they just fall and fall because people think they're old and that they don't run. And those things are both true, but they both overcome it. Before we move to tight ends, I do want to talk about some of the quarterbacks that our rankers have ranked way higher than consensus. And we're going to do this kind of lightning round, 60-second clock apiece, and I will stop you. So we're going to start with Joel, who has Trey Lance at QB6 compared to 11 in consensus.
Well, if he has another preseason game like he did last week, he may move up to number 1. But I said this before on Twitter. He's basically got the upside of Lamar Jackson in 2019. The situations are exceptionally similar. Second year in the system, second year in the league. Questionable passing skills. He's got a much better arm than Lamar Jackson. So he's got that rushing upside, and I think he's got more passing upside than Lamar Jackson did. He's got a very visible path to being the most valuable fantasy asset this year.
I like it, Joel. And I've started to warm up to drafting Trey Lance. And I would say that to me, when I'm thinking about drafting Trey Lance, I think about it a little differently if I'm in a 10-team league versus a 12-team league. If I'm in a 12-team league, I definitely want that insurance quarterback, because you start to hit that quarterback cliff where you get to a point where it's like, I don't really want to have Kirk Cousins as my backup. Like, he'll be fine, but I'd prefer to not have him be my starting quarterback. So I'm comfortable drafting Trey Lance early and then getting an insurance quarterback. And then in 10-team leagues, I think you could definitely go for Trey Lance, because there's going to be quarterbacks on the waivers that you can get to. Next up, we're going to go quickly to Josh and Ryan, and you're going to get 60 seconds each because you're both high on Dak Prescott. Josh, you have him at QB6. Dak Prescott is 10th in our consensus rankings.
The offense is fire. There is a lot of firepower. They're going to throw the football. Dak is now a year removed from the ankle injury. I would expect him to run a little bit more. I don't think it's going to be crazy excessive, but even just that little bit more combined with over 4,700 yards and 30-plus touchdowns, that's what I want out of a quarterback in fantasy. As much as it pains me as an Eagles fan.
Because what I found interesting, Josh, you actually, just to add to exactly what he just said, he doesn't even necessarily need to run more. His first 2 years in the league, he only had 57 rushing attempts. He was at 48 last year.
6 touchdowns apiece.
The efficiency wasn't there. 4.9 yards a carry, 6.3 yards a carry, and 6 touchdowns. All we need him to be is a better runner. He can run the exact same amount. But if we see that number jump to 3 or 4 rushing touchdowns on top of everything Josh said, it's one of the best. It's one of the most pass-heavy offenses in the league. So I'm all in.
I love it. I've definitely been getting more hype about Dak Prescott. He also is a quarterback that does not throw a lot of interceptions, so he's not going to be costing you from week to week with negative points. Okay, we're going to wrap up our quarterback portion of the show with my man, Steve Lawson, who has Justin Fields ranked as the 5th overall quarterback in fantasy football this year. For our consensus rankings, he's at QB 19. So, Steve, what is Justin Fields' pathway to be QB 5?
So Justin Fields' pathway to be QB5 is a lot what Jalen Hurts' path to be a top quarterback last year was, is that he is the only thing working in that offense. He has one wide receiver. He's got a decent tight end, and he's got a very, very mid running back. He is going to be the offense, the entire offense. And this is a first-time head coach. He's coming in. He's ready to, make a name for himself. And he cannot go out there and put up Matt Nagy style numbers this year, right? So what is he going to do? He saw in the last 5 games of the season, Justin Fields averaged around 60 yards rushing per game. Okay, so that alone is going to give him significant upside. This year, I have Justin Fields projected at 3,700 yards passing, 26 touchdowns, 14 interceptions, but 784 rushing yards and 9 rushing touchdowns. Justin Fields' value is in his legs. Read options, rollouts, bootlegs, all that stuff is going to lead Justin Fields, who is a burner, by the way, to fantasy glory. Because everyone who's sitting there and is like coming at me on Twitter or shaking their heads on this podcast and being like, that would never happen. Like, Where were you with Jalen Hurts then last year? Did you say the same thing? Like, unless you were 100%.
Jalen Hurts wasn't a top 5 quarterback last year.
But in points per game,
You have him at 3,700 yards. Jalen Hurts barely threw 3,000.
Jalen Hurts in points per game was a QB1.
A QB1, yes. Not QB4.
And for a length of time, he was the QB1 before an injury. When Justin Fields is the only guy that will score in that offense, that is going to lead to fantasy glory. Who else is going to do it? Like, the Bears are not going to score 10 points a game. They're just not. That's not the way the league works.
That offense could very well only score 10 points a game.
So
They're that bad.
I'm going to say this. To combine with Justin Fields' top QB finish, I've also projected Darnell Mooney to have a top 10 wide receiver finish this year, because who else is he going to throw to? Look for Justin Fields, draft him late, and laugh.
I think my concern is the touchdowns. I'm not just picking on you. I mean, it's a ludicrous ranking, but you have Justin Fields scoring 9 rushing touchdowns when this team scored 13 rushing touchdowns total last year. So you're just projecting.
Because it was Matt Nagy. Matt Nagy is one of the worst play callers, maybe the worst. If Urban Meyer wasn't in the league last year, Matt Nagy would have without a doubt been the worst coach in the NFL last year.
So I'm going to wrap this up because we got to talk about tight ends. My biggest concern about Justin Fields is you talked about Jalen Hurts. Jalen Hurts at least had Jason Kelce at center. He had
No, he's actually talking about center.
No, he's talking about the offensive
I'm actually
line.
talking about center.
Let me ask you, what happens with running quarterbacks when the pocket breaks down? What do they do?
They either get sacked or they somehow escape.
Or they run. Justin Fields is going to be on the run.
But the thing is,
a lot.
If defenses know that you're going to do that, they're just going to put a linebacker as a quarterback spy that just chases Justin Fields down all year long.
What linebacker in that division do you think is going to go chase down
Justin Fields at injury risk, and it's not sustainable over a 17-game span.
And the other thing is, like, if you go look at Jalen Hurts' college numbers, at just rushing, he was 900, 800, 1,300. Fields never crossed 500. I think we're projecting this. He didn't have
to, because he's also a better passer than Jalen Hurts. We forget that Justin Fields is a very good passer of the football.
I mean, if you're a good runner and a good passer, you still run more than 500 yards in a season.
Not if you can just sit there and sling it. At Ohio State, he was putting up 50 points a game.
Very different.
Hurts was at Alabama.
Yeah, which runs a lot more than Ohio State was. Listen,
I'm pretty sure they were scoring 50 points a game.
Yeah, but it's not comparable because there wasn't as many design.
You're right.
For
it's
Justin
not
Fields.
comparable. Jalen Hurts and
Jalen Hurts is not a better talent.
Comparable.
Jalen Hurts is not a better talent in any facet of football than Justin Fields.
Except last year in fantasy.
He's not a better runner.
Fantasy.
So speaking of Jalen Hurts, his tight end.
We got to let Steve go.
Dallas Goedert.
I do have to jump.
Steve has to jump. Bye, Steve.
I will see
Steve.
you guys.
Always love
later, man.
Have a good one.
All love, guys. See you later.
Be good, man.
Justin Fields. Okay, so tight ends.
Yes. Where we can all agree.
You know what? We actually agree.
I was going to say, I was shocked by it as well, but I'll let you know.
So our consensus rankings for the top 12 tight ends. First off, our top 6 is Travis Kelce at number 1, followed by Mark Andrews, Kyle Pitts, Dalton Schultz at tight end 4. Ryan, I know you're happy about that. And then George Kittle and Darren Waller. Now I'm going to pause here because across all 6 rankers, there was no other tight end that made our top 6. It was one of these 6 or maybe a little TJ Hawkinson thrown in. And it would have been the case that the top 7 were all the top 7 in all of our rankings in some variation. But then Steve went and ranked TJ Hawkinson tight end 11. So that ruined that fun part of the narrative. But anyway, so top 6, that's the definition of consensus. We all agree they are the top 6 or 7 tight ends this year. After that, we have TJ Hawkinson at tight end 7, Dallas Goedert at 8, Mike Gesicki at 9, Pat Freiermuth at 10, Zach Ertz 11th, and Cole Kmet. And I swear our rankers have conspired against me for this one because it was not originally the case that he was in our top 12. I think our rankers saw the show sheet when I drafted it a long time ago, And they're like, oh man, we got to get Cole Kmet up in there so we can talk about him. Good news is we're not talking about Cole Kmet.
Sorry, Kevin.
We might touch on that.
Great, we just lost a viewer, damn it.
Yeah. Not just a viewer, Fantasy Pros Rising Star of the Year.
Exactly.
So I don't want to dwell too much on the top players and debate like who should be 1, who should be 2. Like I mentioned, our top 7 consensus players, they were everyone's top 7 with the exception of TJ Hawkinson. And there's still a lot that we can discuss with the tight end position. And we could do a full episode on the position, but again, I don't like tight ends, so that's not happening. But instead, I want to start the conversation this way. So the past 2 seasons, we've seen historic drop-offs from first to third in fantasy tight ends. Last season, there was a 92.3 drop-off from tight end 1 to tight end 3, which was 5.4 points per game. In 2020, it was even worse. There was a 136-point drop-off, which was 8.5 points per game. That's from tight end 1 to tight end 3. But before then, in 2019, it was only a 33-point drop-off. In 2018, that was 36 points. 2017, 31 points. In 2016, only 16 points. So the point is that the past 2 years have been outliers if you look at the trend over the past 6 years in terms of the drop-off between tight end 1 and tight end 3. There are 4 tight ends that I think have the potential to be the tight end 3 on the season. Those are Kyle Pitts, Dalton Schultz, George Kittle, and Darren Waller. And so my question is, are any of them good enough to close this gap to first that we've seen over the past 2 years? Do we think we're still going to see this 100-point gap between first and third, or do we think that gap closes? And Ryan, I'm going to come to you for this one because you have been talking up Dalton Schultz, and he has the potential to be the tight end 3 this year. Do you think he can close the gap, though, to number 1?
So what's interesting is your tight end 1s over the last couple of years have really put in like atypical like monster seasons out of nowhere, specifically Mark Andrews last year. I don't think anyone expected Mark Andrews to have a 150 target season. When I was doing my research and my love for Dalton Schultz, and Schultz is still my tight end 3, I upped his projections. I have him at about 113 targets. But there is a season that exists that Dalton Schultz is 130 to even 150 target guy. Amari Cooper left that offense at 103 targets, about 7 targets per game. Schultz was just ahead of him at 104. Our goal right now is to figure out where those 7 targets are going to go. I mean, you also lost Cedric Wilson, but you can pretty much just pencil Jalen Tolbert in for those targets. With Michael Gallup, who had, I believe, 80 to 90 targets last year, or maybe it was 60, but it was like 8 per game. The long and short is Michael Gallup was already a part of that offense with Schultz eating. So again, we're finding a home for these Amari Cooper targets. Dalton Schultz makes the most sense. A conservative estimate is to give him 1 per game and bump him up to about 121. What if you don't want to be conservative? What if he takes 3 of those targets? We're talking 51 targets on top of 104, and all of a sudden we're looking at Mark Andrews. So not only could the tight end 3 close the gap, but we may not be talking about Dalton Schultz as the tight end 3. We might be talking as Mark Andrews. How close is he to Dalton Schultz? And I know that sounds hyperbolic, but I will add, and Josh knows I love to bring this up, I called the Mark Andrews burst just 1 damn year early. So it's not unheard of that we see this jump because we saw it from Mark Andrews. And Schultz is in an eerily similar situation, except on a team that is likely to throw the ball more, whereas we saw Baltimore kind of out of character throwing the ball a lot more last year. So I think you could see the top 3 much closer grouped. And I know our guy Elixirs is all about Kyle Pitts. To be honest, in that offense, he's the only guy. So I do think it's a closer grouping to answer your question much more simply. Right now, between Kelsey and Schultz, I have a 40-point deficit.
Okay. So, Josh, I want to come to you next because you have Kyle Pitts as the number 3 tight end. Does Kyle Pitts close the gap to the number 1 tight end this year?
I think probably based on situation amongst the guys, Pitts, Schultz, Waller, Kittle. When you look at, situation, how they play their individual games, Pitts probably has the easiest path to break into that top 2. Simply because there's really nobody else. Like, you're expecting a rookie wide receiver to come in and be dominant. I know we've kind of been spoiled to this fact over the last few years, but London doesn't separate the way that, guys like Jamar Chase can get down the field. Like Drake London's a contested catch guy. So, his game is just a little different for my liking in terms of, a huge breakout this year. Obviously the quarterback play is suspect, but you don't spend a top 4 draft pick on a tight end unless you're going to make him the feature of the offense. That's why I like Pitts' upside here. Plus, he gets down the field. I mean, he averaged over 15 yards of reception last year. I understand he only had 1 touchdown. And we'll beat this drum, obviously, with Cole Kmet. But a guy that it's as talented as Kyle Pitts is not going to only have 1 or 2 touchdowns in a year. It's just not going to happen. I only have him 0.03 fantasy points above Dalton Schultz. But for me, what really keeps Schultz back from that top 1 or 2 range is because he's not a big yards per catch guy. I when I look at my tight end 1s, my tight end 2, I'm expecting 12.5 yards per reception and above, or 15 touchdowns. You want some sort of spike in between that. And I just don't really see that in Dalton Schultz's game, especially because when they get down towards the red zone, you're looking at Zeke. Dak can run it in. Obviously, CeeDee Lamb being the number 1 guy now will obviously see his red zone touches or looks there. So I think that's really what kind of caps Schultz. Obviously, the competition now with Waller bringing in, Devontae Adams. We saw obviously the rise of Hunter Renfro. McDaniel's coming in. Maybe they want to play more 2 tight end sets and you get Foster Moreau involved. I think that kind of caps him there, but he's still a big, yards per catch guy. He's going to stretch the field. That's what he does. I just don't know he's going to get enough targets. And he's never been a high volume touchdown guy. George Kittle, we've seen be that guy. But again, I feel like for me, it's going to take either Deebo Samuel getting hurt, missing a huge chunk of time, and or Brandon Ayuk going down for Kittle to be that number 1 guy. Because right now, he's like a 2B in that offense, which is fine, but I don't think it's going to translate into a high target volume, even though the yards per reception, the yak, all of that stuff is there for Kittle.
So this is all making me think that the tight end position might be a bit deeper this year, where it's less that we have 2 guys that are just far and above beyond the rest, and then it's just a complete drop off. And so to that end, I want to ask Joel, where are you taking tight ends 3 through 7 this year in fantasy drafts? Because we mock draft every Monday and we see Travis Kelce and Mark Andrews frequently go late first round, early second round. And then after that, we would typically expect a drop off, but we're thinking this year it might be a bit closer. So how early are you taking that 3rd tight end, Joel?
So I think you kind of hit on it there. We've all done a bunch of drafts and you guys draft every Monday. So I think we've seen that basically Kelce goes kind of late first in pretty much every draft. Andrews goes somewhere in the middle of the second. And then, Pitts is usually going around that 2-3 turn, somewhere like that. So if you want one of those guys, you pretty much have to jump in the second round. If you're willing to wait, then, you can probably wait a couple rounds to get, if you think Kittle's going to stay healthy, if you think Waller's going to be involved in the offense, if you agree with Ryan that Dalton Schultz becomes the second target in Dallas, and they're all reasonable, but everyone's got their, it's 50-50. Everyone's got their own stances on who they want as the next guy. So if you want one of those top 3 guys, I think you need to jump in the second. If you're willing to wait, then then you can wait a couple rounds to get one of those guys. If you think Hawkinson or Goddard belongs in that tier, then you can wait even longer.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point, Joel, that when it comes to fantasy football and the rankings, it's often more helpful to think of these things in tiers. And so there's a clear tier of the top 2 or 3. Whoever you think that 3rd tight end is, it might differ from person to person, but whoever you think that 3rd tight end is, that's kind of your top tier. You're going in the first couple of rounds.
I would even go with it as the top 2. I did not to argue, but
yeah.
Even as someone who adores Dalton Schultz and sees him with a tight end 1 ceiling, I'm not considering him, and not that you should be. You got to play ADP in this. But the first 2 rounds are Kelce and Andrews, and you could argue Andrews is touching on a stretch, but it's Kelce and Andrews. after that, even in our drafts, we're noticing Waller and Kittle are now falling to the fourth. The third is almost a no man's zone for tight ends at this point. And so I think there's a pretty clear tier break even at the top two. You can play games with the top three, but the good news is you don't have to draft them that high anymore. Sorry.
No, that's a great point. And so I think whenever you're going into your draft, you need to decide kind of your tiers of players that you want to get depending on where you're at in the draft. And to me, I think it's worth it to get a tight end early if you're getting Travis Kelce or Mark Andrews, because you get that positional advantage. But if you're going to wait, you got to kind of just pick where you're going to have that trade-off, where you're going to get the tight end instead of maybe another receiver or running back. So apart from that, I do want to talk about specific players. And basically, I want to talk about the tight ends that might break out, in air quotes, or, might score you a touchdown every now and then. The people that we feel the best about that are outside of our top 7, essentially. And we all kind of have someone different ranked in this range. And so I'm just going to give everyone a quick minute to talk about their tight end that they have kind of ranked way higher than consensus and they think is worth it if you've kind of waited past those top 7 and you're in this tight end dead zone, which is basically the whole position. And we're going to start with Josh, who has Hunter Henry at tight end 9.
I mean, for me, it's about the touchdowns. I mean, he's their red zone guy. We saw it last year. Our co-host on No Punt Intended, Joe Zolo, has always been a Patriots guy, and he said, Hunter Henry's going to come in. He's going to play that Gronk role, and that's exactly what he did. He scored all the touchdowns. That's what elevated him into the top 10 last year. I don't see how or why that should be any different this year. I don't see him as like a 90 target guy, which, all right, whatever. I understand that you want to draft the guys that, have larger target shares that are, first, second, or a high, like a 2B in the offense in terms of, pecking order for targets. But, there's something said for touchdowns. Like, this offense is still going to score touchdowns, and they're going to throw them to Hunter Henry. It's just what they're going to do. So, am I drafting him as the 9th tight end? No, I'm not. But he's going to go at like tight end 15, and I would much rather bank on those touchdowns than, maybe take a dart throw on like a Tyler Higbee or even a Dawson Knox. Like, I don't even know how his involvement is going to be in that offense. Like, we saw the touchdown spike with him last year, but there's a chance that we could see high target volume. There's a chance that we couldn't. Maybe he's due for touchdown regression. I don't know. But what I do know is that this offense in New England throws touchdowns to the tight end, and that tight end is Hunter Henry.
Yeah. And you brought up a good point that I actually want to highlight. So you said you have him ranked as the tight end 9, but you don't expect to draft him there. And I think for anyone listening to this, this is a really key point. If you have someone's rankings that you really like and you follow those for advice, you should be looking at where they have certain players ranked compared to their ADP and figuring
especially
out
the
where
that you're drafting on. That's the biggest key.
Yep.
Yeah, and notice the differences, because that will help you gain insight as to where you might gain value. Hunter Henry is not tight end 9 in ADP right now. And so if you believe that Joshua has this right and is going, and Hunter Henry will be a top 10 tight end, you're identifying significant value that you can wait on and get a top 10 tight end there. Next, I want to come to Ryan quickly, who has Hayden Hurst at tight end 12.
It's a sheer volume and love the offense thing. I am so glad you brought up the tight end 9 thing, because like Josh said, he's not drafting him at tight end 9. And what Josh means to say is he's not going to be the guy who takes the 9th tight end off the board. If Josh doesn't get one of the early guys, yeah. I mean, that's this entire room. I've drafted with you guys enough. We're not going to be that guy. Joel and me are Travis Kelce in the first round guys. Like, that's just, we understand the positional advantage and we believe in the positional advantage. But back to Hurst, adore the Bengals offense. If you go back and look at what they did with CJ Uzomah last year, I believe my math is right. He was 4 targets a game. I'm projecting him at 5 targets a game. 5 targets a game brings him up to about 81 targets for Hurst. I think there's going to be a lot of focus on these wide receivers, but more importantly, it puts him exactly where he was in 2020 when he was the tight end 11. However, if you believe in my rankings, you're still not drafting Hayden Hurst, because there's another key point I would add to that. All I care about is their week 1 matchup, and I'm not starting Hayden Hurst against the Pittsburgh Steelers. Plain and simple. They are very good against the tight end historically. So do I think Hayden Hurst is the tight end 12 by the time the season's over? Yes, I probably do. And if one of those wide receivers were to get hurt, Hayden Hurst would be a guy I want on my fantasy roster immediately. However, if I don't walk out with Dalton Schultz, Kyle Pitts, all the guys you mentioned before, I'm not going to go through the whole name. If I don't walk out with one of those 5 or 6 or whatever the hell it is, I'm also not drafting Hayden Hurst at the end of my draft. I'm focusing on week 1 matchups at that point. And I'll be honest, I don't know who I'm drafting at that point because I've been getting the big guys and it's not entered into my strategy yet. But maybe I'll have that information ready for the mock draft show on Monday. But like I said, while I do like Hayden Hurst and I adore the Bengals offense like we talked about earlier, I do think he's the top 12 tight end. I'm not drafting him at all because I can't play him in week 1. And I will not take players that I cannot play in week 1.
Yeah, and just like a little thing that you brought up in there, if you draft a tight end early and get Travis Kelce or Mark Andrews, you don't have to worry about it for the rest of the time.
Please do not take a second tight end.
And it's like, it's so great. You're just done. If you're in a best ball league, you could take both of them up front. I don't care. And then you really don't have to worry about it.
Bully tight end works really good in best ball.
Okay, Joel, we're going to come to you briefly with Albert Okuwebanam at tight end 8.
Thank you, Katie.
Tell us about Albert O.
Well, see, I think we need to be careful about tripping on our own narratives, right? Because everyone's saying, okay, Russell Wilson's going there and he never throws to the tight end, blah, 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 blah. And that's all true. But they've also got, and Nate Hackett is there and he was the Packers offensive coordinator and Rodgers doesn't like to throw to the tight end, blah, blah, blah. That's also true. But 2 years ago, Robert Tonyan tied for the league lead in tight end touchdowns. Yep. Because he ran he would chip and then he'd run a drag route and they'd get the ball to him wide open and he scored 10 touchdowns in 2000. Last year, David Bakhtiari was hurt, so they had to leave him in the block. So he didn't get to run those routes. Alberto is about 3 billion times better an athlete and a prospect than Robert Tonyan is. If he gets those opportunities, double-digit touchdowns is his floor. So, and when you get past those top tight ends, all you care about is touchdowns. Josh alluded to it earlier. It's touchdown or bust, basically. So, and that offense is going to be much better with Wilson at the helm than Drew Lock or Teddy Bridgewater. So there's going to be more opportunities there. And they traded for Russell Wilson. They gave away Noah Fant. They held on to Alberto. So they obviously like him. So there's huge opportunity there. And that's when you're down in that tier of tight ends, that's all you really care about is there an opportunity? Can they score touchdowns?
And I absolutely love what Joel said there because I am someone who beats the Green Bay doesn't throw to the tight end narrative over the head when it comes to Cole Kmet. But there is a key difference, and Joel, you hit it right off the rip. Russell Wilson and despite Steve's faith, Justin Fields. So I'm going to bet on Russell Wilson. I'm going to bet on a very good Denver team that has one of the best defenses in football routinely. It's a very different system. And with guys like Javonte Williams and Melvin Gordon, they're likely to end up in the red zone much more often. And one of my favorite narratives that I love to hit in fantasy football is wide receivers who control pass interference calls. And that's a Courtland Sutton type wide receiver where there's going to be plays where they get trapped in the red zone because Courtland Sutton got his jersey tugged on. And now all of a sudden they're at the 5-yard line. Play action pass, touchdown Alberto. So I'm good with it. So
I love the narrative of the AFC West. Like that's going to be a dogfight of a conference. There's going to be a lot of shootouts this year. And so you want those high volume offenses, and Denver is going to have to pass a decent amount to win out some of these games. I'll quickly just talk about my kind of dart throw tight end that I'm taking late in drafts, and mine's Austin Hooper. I have him ranked at tight end 10, and the thinking here is simple. People keep asking, who's Ryan Tannehill going to throw to? He's got a tight end. He's got Austin Hooper, and we do have history.
Treylon Burks. Get it right.
Well, outside of Treylon Burks.
No, he's got Robert Woods. Let's just
because we know he's not throwing to Derrick Henry.
Let me be perfectly clear. I love Austin Hooper. So please keep going, Austin. I'm sorry. We're stepping all over you.
Oh, you're great. Well, we have history of Ryan Tannehill throwing to a tight end. Jonnu Smith had a fantastic year a couple years ago, I think until he got hurt. But he was a solid tight end week in and week out. And Ryan Tannehill was the one throwing the ball to him. I also think they have Derrick Henry still. They're probably going to be playing a lot of 12 personnel, 2 tight end sets, and having some play action pass in there, and Austin Hooper coming off the end and catching passes over the middle of the field. I love it. I'm here for it. I'm not drafting him as the tight end 10, like everybody's already kind of alluded to. I might take him with my last pick in a draft, but I think he has a chance to win people at least a few weeks, which is the important thing here. We're looking to win weekly matchups as much as we are the full season.
Well, you
I think he's gaining some steam, so I don't know if you can get him with the last pick. So.
Well, that's a good point. I don't know what his ADP is, but you hit on a great point with Hooper, the point that you didn't even touch on. We've seen Hooper play tight end 1, overall tight end 1 fantasy football. And it was in a situation very similar to what we have right now with Tennessee. Wide receivers who we don't know if they can score touchdowns. I love Robert Woods. He's never been a prolific touchdown scorer. We don't know what we have out of Treylon Burks. Obviously, Derrick Henry can get it done. But when Hooper was the tight end 1 in Atlanta, Devonta Freeman could get it done. The tight end and the running back don't necessarily have to kill each other the way people think they do, as long as you have a coach who's willing to call play action, which Vrabel is. But that's very interesting, Joel. I don't know what his AD, because it has been creeping up, because I know for the longest time he was free, because I was grabbing him at the end of like every underdog best ball draft. So,
you could thank me for that.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Give me a sec. I'll tell you what his ADP is.
Yeah, I was going to say, look it up.
Hooper, tight end 25, 199 overall.
So as of now, still good.
Yeah.
One spot below Hayden Hurst, by the way.
Also
That's
free.
incredible. And all ahead of Jonnu Smith.
Oh, Jonnu, how the mighty have fallen.
Well, he's creeped up to tight end 40 now. I don't know what it was.
Oh, yeah, that's right. He was the last one on the list, wasn't he? When we were looking the one time. So.
Oh yeah, that's why I brought him up. I remember that episode.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, y'all, this has been really fun. I really appreciate y'all. I appreciate all of our listeners that tuned in. We'll be back next Thursday at 7 p.m. with our running back rankings. And before I do a final call out of all of our rankers, I'm going to turn it over to Josh, because we need to promote Women of Fantasy Football.
Yeah, so hopefully everybody tuned in to last night's week 2 episode of Women of Fantasy Football, hosted by Faith Enos and Kelly Singh. And judging by our YouTube views, it sounds like you did tune in last night, which is fantastic. But as I announced at the very end of the show, heading into week 3, just like we did in week 1 and week 2, we're giving away a couple more signed jerseys. All the money that we raised through the raffle tickets, they're $5 each. It's going into a scholarship fund that we've set up with Galvanize, which was founded by Fox Sports reporter Laura Oakman. Galvanize puts on a series of boot camps with sports franchises. We're going to focus on the ones she does with the NFL teams. And it's all designed to kind of coach, mentor, and teach women about the world of sports, what it takes to get involved, and kind of sort of creating that bond of sisterhood as women in sports. So the 2 jerseys that we're giving away this week, we're going old school with a Hall of Famer. I have a signed Deion Sanders jersey, and then I wanted to go brand spanking new and see if Deion can cover this guy. How about a signed Jamar Chase Bengals jersey? I think that sounds really good. So we announced the raffles last night. So far, we've already raised $150 just through ticket sales. You can head over to our website, womenoffantasyfootball.com. Just click on the jersey picture that you see. It'll take you over to the raffle website. You can also click on the description in the YouTube channel and the Facebook page, wherever you find it. And you'll have that link that'll take you right over to the site where you can purchase your tickets. As I mentioned, $5 per ticket. You can buy as many as you'd like. And tune in next Wednesday, and we'll see who wins.
Awesome. Thanks, Josh.
Yep.
Again, we'll be back next Thursday at 7 p.m. In the meantime, you can catch our consensus rankings at clubfantasyffl.com. You can also check out a profile for each team where we focus on a player from each team, and then we give a couple nuggets from other players on that team. But once again, our consensus rankers, myself, Austin Amandolia at Austin_FFL, Josh Hudson at the One Hudsonian, Ryan Weisse at the Fantasy 5, Joel Wirth at the Joel Wirth, Steve Lawson at FF by Committee, and Chris Molina at ChrisMo2413. Remember, defense wins championships. Offense wins fantasy football.
Boom.
Bye, y'all.